Tēnā koutou, kia ora mai, tātou katoa. I'm a ringin, you have to know that. I wasn't on the agenda originally, but I nudged my way through and said, "Can be there?" But it gives me great pleasure to be able to offer some thoughts this morning. And the difficult thing about speaking around kai time is that generally you're supposed to aid digestion, not create indigestion. So I'm hoping that by the end of my speech you'll have a nice feeling in your replenishment. I had initially thought that I would speak about some from a policy angle, but given yesterday and the reference points from yesterday, it made me think again about how I would present to you this morning. And so yesterday was a strong reference point. We were at the marae and we got a presentation from Kai Mamai about the kingitanga and about Tiranga Wawa and about Te Puia. And it led me to think in connection with the theme of your conference, Mahi a te Mahi hei mai o te iwi. What is it that we're all tasked to do to make the lives of the next generation a little bit better, a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more future oriented? And some of the key things coming out of her speech, as I said yesterday, was that in some ways we can understand the inherent expectation, certainly within Waikato, about having your own vision and the audacity to think that you can dream big. And her stories kind of gave a glimmer of why that is so. But more importantly, the pillars of what defines us as Māori, as Waikato, as Tūhoe, as Te Arawa, as wherever we come from. But we have the audacity to think that we can be the architects of our own destiny, because we come from some very strong orientations where our ancestors, our tupuna like Te Puia, was very clear that we are who we are. You know, things may happen around us, but we are who we are. And the sole determiner for our sense of identity and our purpose, our sense of purpose, is that we want a better lot for our kids and their kids and those who follow. So we have the audacity to hope and dream big. Secondly, we have to have the capacity to think that we can do it for ourselves. That yes, collaboration with others and support from others is just that. But others don't define who we are and where we are going. Then we move on to Barna's presentation, and you know, sometimes I'm still he was my teacher. So you know, I slip sometimes and I can call him sir, and then I think, snap out of it. I've grown up now. But anyway, you know, he was my teacher, and I have to say, back in the time when I was at school and coming from a community where your teacher and your principal were like the mayor. They were the major opinion leaders in your community. What they said, all the other parents went, yeah, must be right. But the context that he gave us yesterday was more about, okay, understanding who we are and what we want to do for ourselves, which is inherent, I'm sure, in all of our aspirations. Then, how do we lift that expectation up to kind of a bigger model or a bigger version of what could be done to advance the general opportunities that are afforded through education. And again, we're all here because we're passionate about education. Now, I've only had this portfolio for 7 months, but I can tell you, in all the schools that I've visited, you're not in it for the money. You're in it because you are passionate about education, and that is what underpins success in education, is because to be successful, and certainly for our kids in education, it is about having a passion for them, their potential, and them being the best that they can. I think this is a real gem that I've certainly found amongst Māori teachers and principals, and the quality of their leadership within the education system. I'll come back to that. Then I think about my contribution this morning at breakfast. And I'm drawing on yesterday thinking, well, I'm in the domain of policy making, and one thing I've learnt is you don't leave you don't leave all the answers to the politicians. But politicians have a very useful role in terms of guiding the aspirations of the sector, for example. So when I reflect on yesterday, I'm only more concerned that the real challenge in education right now is that we have to change the norm. If we are critically tasked with improving the outcomes of the next generation, and more significantly for Māori and Pacific children, then we have to shift the norm. We're not talking about bell curves anymore. We have to be talking about maybe the kumite or the inverted Chinese gong, where the picture is a half circle. Because if we want to really lift the 20% that everybody right now is talking about, we have to get the greatest transformation in that space, which means quite a sharp lift, and it's a transformative lift. And that's why, I guess, in my thinking, especially for Labour, where I'm wanting to move our policy is, how do we get that sharp lift? How do we shift the norm? And you'll hear time and time again that we do have a great education system for those operating under the norm. But for our kids, we need to do things a little bit differently. And it demands us all to work together, whether we're in Māori mainstream or in English mainstream, to bring that approach more together for their benefit. So I thought about this, and I thought, I don't have all the answers. I have to say you do. And from a lot of the accumulated, I guess, wisdom that I've received from people that I've talked to, shifting the norm requires a number of things to happen. Within the education system generally, we have to be unrepentant about a deliberate strategy to grow the teaching workforce of Māori and Pacific people. And we have to be unrepentant about it. We have to have a value proposition that says our classrooms are more diverse and they require skills, teacher skills who are able to respond to that level of diversity. By 2025, there's a very real prospect that our country will be looking more multicultural than ever before, where Māori and Pacific combined with Asian will be the great majority of this country's look and feel. But do our classrooms look and feel like they don't right now? So that's a challenge. The second challenge is, what are the measures for success in our society right now, and where are the deficits? We don't have a value measure for the contribution of identity, culture, language, that should be sitting alongside there with the educational measures that you're all too familiar with. But it should and can happen. Why? Because when I went to the middle schools conference this year and heard Anne Mill from Kia Aroha College say, well, this is an internal measure, but we wanted to do it because we knew it made a critical difference to the outcomes for our kids. She has a value measure for culture and identity alongside the other ones. And she can tell individual stories of students who would have been identified as children with behavioural problems, then ingest, the cultural component, the language component, the support of whānau, and she's able to track quite clearly where the spikes happen in terms of achievement, and it's at that point of intervention. So I think there's a very real opportunity there right now in our education system if certainly we as political leaders are saying that this is the challenge right now, to lift Māori and Pacific achievement, that we put a value measure on culture, on identity, on language. And that will only improve our ability to respond to the diversity that will happen in our schools. The third pillar, in my view, and it's probably why I got involved with Labour, and it was only for this reason, about what quality public education can do. I'll tell you a little story. It's going to be as short as I can make it. But it's my education heritage, if you like, my education whakapapa. It was very strongly promoted in my family. I came from a household where educational success was an expectation, not a luxury or a choice, it was an expectation. I used to dread going home with my reports to my father saying, we put good money into education, what are you doing with it? I hated those discussions, because I was generally, if you likened me to an Olympic team member, I would have been in the endurance sports. I was there for the long distance race. I definitely wasn't a performance player. And I didn't peak at the times when I was supposed to, but I made it to the end, I tell you. But, you know, our education story goes something like this. My mum grew up in a small town up north, in Kawakawa. The only two ways out of that community were if you played tennis really well or got a scholarship to go to Queen Victoria School for Girls. Long story short, she did both and went to Queen Vic. Did really well at Queen Vic, and again, if we think about the last real spike of educational leadership, it came out of our Māori boarding schools. The next spike will be out of our wharekura when we look back. So anyway, she got to Auckland, did really well at secondary school, got a scholarship, went down to Otago to do physiotherapy. There enters my dad. He started at a native school. The Scottish principal thought he had potential. Te Puia thought he had potential. Sent him to Mount Albert. He realised his potential was in the school of life. Told us he was leaving school at 14. Came back. His uncle got him a job in the mines. Lied about his age. Went over to Malaya. Came back and went to Otago. Met my mum. I love Otago for that reason. I might have been half Malaysian if had that not met my mum. They courted. I was supposed to call it in the time. And then she said to him, well, I'm not marrying no gumboot. If you want to be with me, you better get an education. Long story short, they moved to Auckland. She got the job. She worked while he studied as an adult student, got to school C at 23. The rest, by and large, is history, to the extent that through both my parents, they realised what the real strength of education is. So we grew up in a household where I can say at my age that I'm a second generation graduate, whereas my cousins of the same age would be the first of their household. So the point of that story really is that if we want to make a difference, it's got to be an intergenerational difference. And if we're thinking about shifting the norm, in a sense, that's happened. The one in you know, what's good for Māori is good for everyone. Tapping into the potential of intergenerational education. They've kind of moved the expectations of households. So it's happened in that regard. Can it happen within our public schooling system? Because it should. And it's my strong view that if we're thinking about that intergenerational shift and shifting the norm, then you need to be supported by policies that could support community education models in your way. So what works for Melville might not work for Murupara. What works for Papakura might not work for Te Awamutu. But the point of it is that if you had the support to tap in to a community education model where that intergenerational shift can happen, even if it is help in supporting your children to read, write and count, you have financial literacy for parents as well. Or, you know, literacy initiatives for the parents as well. Because a lot of our parents, you all know, are young. They left school young. They had kids young. We've got a lot of young grandparents now, you know. I'm a grandparent. Is it cool when you're still having babies that are older than your mom? You know? But that's what's happening because, you know, of things. So my point about public education is that we have to be very clear that our solutions right now will still continue to flow through quality public education and a broadening of what that can afford for intergenerational educational transformation. And so, in my view, that's where the policy directive has to kind of start pushing on. Again, if we want to lift and change that bell curve to a half circle, get the greatest transformation at that end. The challenges of the right now, you know, and this is probably where the hard rub comes. And I know I'm being followed by the Minister. But one thing I will say, just on that at a personal level, I could quite safely say that had it not have been for the type of relationship that Ngata had with Te Puia, then perhaps Te Puia wouldn't have had so much optimism about where education could take our people. Because just as she was anti-conscription, she wasn't all that fond of the public education system of the day. You know, and that relationship that she had with Gunther.